We are honored today to have David Abel on the phone with us, and David is a longtime friend of mine. And, you know, the funny thing about David is I've known David about 20 years now, and when I look at him when we're together, he looks the exact same when I first met him as he does today, and I know I've gotten a lot older. So David is one of these timeless people who has created the VerdeXchange in Los Angeles, which is a think tank, and he's publishing all about green innovators and people who are really doing the green is good thing. But before the Green Exchange came up, the VerdeXchange, David was he was a lawyer, and he was a director of the Coro Foundation, a Robert Kennedy Fellow. He's married to Brenda Levin, who was recycling buildings. When I knew her 20 years ago, she was one of the most famous restoration architects in the world, still is. David, I could just talk on and on for the next 30 minutes about who you are and what you do, but I'm going to leave that up to you. Welcome to Green is Good. Mike and I are honored to have you on with us today.
Well, John and Mike, it's a pleasure to be with you. And you're right, John. I've known you for 20 years, and you're even more energetic now than you were then.
Hey, David, this is an honor because truly you've always been a leader in everything you've touched, and everything you've touched has gone to gold that I've seen in the last 20 years. Talk about a little bit why you started the VerdeXchange. What's the size of the market, for clean and green technology, and why did you think it was so important to put green innovators and entrepreneurs and put this think tank together that you've done splendidly, and I've watched you evolve over the last 2.5 years?
Well, John, I'll give you the sort of personal answer, which is that I sold some businesses, one of which was a national company called Super Shuttle, a ground transportation business, about 3 years ago. My son, a Stanford graduate, was into clean and green technology, and I thought I'd try to understand what he was doing. And I stumbled into the clean and green technology arena and realized it was no longer an environmental or a social issue as I had understood it when I was in my 20s and 30s and 40s. It's now a multi-billion-dollar market that's revolutionizing all the levels of the global economy, and companies that produce goods and services aimed at battling climate change already generate $300 billion in annual revenues, surpassing, you might appreciate, the global biotech and software sectors combined. That caught my interest both because of the social and civic reasons and because I realized that it had evolved into a much, much different market. And I was in Los Angeles, and California was on the cutting edge of that climate change revolution with proactive laws and new regulations and pretty strong leadership at the state level. And I realized that then California was at the epicenter of this clean tech revolution I've just described. And I wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to be a part of the $3.3 billion that has been invested in clean tech in California and the western states. And I thought the place to do it and the way to do it was to create a marketplace on the Pacific Rim, starting in Los Angeles, that would bring together the leading manufacturers and entrepreneurs and global leaders and thought leaders, financiers, policymakers, and really try to lift the level of understanding in this new marketplace for the procurement process and for the leaders that were pushing the envelope but didn't really understand the industry. And we began that 3 years ago. You were part of the first conference. We just finished one last January 2009, and we're planning our third one in January 2010 on the 24th and 25th. So that's sort of a summary of the background. If you want to drill down on the size of this market, which is astounding, and what its potential is given the federal actions now pending in Congress, I'd be happy to go that way too.
Yeah, so I do. I mean, so Elliot, your wonderful son, who's now in Wales, who's the Chief Sustainability Manager for G24I.
Yeah.
Right, G24I, which is a solar company, right?
It's a thin-film solar company started by Americans, one of which is Bob Hertzberg, the former Speaker of the California Assembly. But Elliot has just returned to go to Yale Business School to get an MBA to try to understand how to scale it himself in the future. But those 2.5 years in Cardiff with Bob and a startup thin-film solar company were an invaluable learning experience for him and for me.
Perfect. So he's going to be following one of our last guests that Mike and I had on was Andrew Winston, who is is a Yale graduate, who I think even still works in and around the Yale area. So he's going to be following Andrew Winston, who wrote, I think, just recently, Green Recovery, and he wrote Green to Gold. So he's going to be following his footsteps over there at Yale. You had this epiphany because Elliot was getting involved with the whole sustainability movement. Now, wait a second. From epiphany to creating the VerdeXchange, though, you just explained the marketplace, and I want to understand more, but where did you then see the real visible buckets in and around California and Los Angeles, and then why the VerdeXchange as opposed to so many other things you could have done?
Well, I've been publishing for 25 years in planning and infrastructure investment, so the part of publishing and bringing people together is a core part of my being, and I've been an investor, but I really thought over my head. I wanted to learn about this emerging sector that, as I said, is bigger than biotech.
So explain then, who did you bring together for the first couple of conferences, and what do those buckets look like?
Yeah, we brought truly the leading professionals in this arena, from former Secretary of Transportation and Commerce Norm Mineta, and Mickey Cantor, the former Commerce Secretary and Trade Representative, and Congressman Earl Blumenauer and Senator Bingaman, and Mary Nichols, who's the chair of the California Air Resources Board, and we brought leaders in from Japan and Germany and France in these different sectors, and the leaders of the utilities, both public and private, and Edison and PG&E, and the largest municipal utility in the country, the LA Department of Water and Power. We brought in public officials, as I said, and we brought in technical people in solar and wind. We brought in the largest pension funds in the country, CalPERS and CalSTRS, and we set up about 50 panels, much on the model of, some people know, the TED conferences, where panels of 3 and 4, each person was asked to give about 7 minutes of their best pitch on their technology and where they were in it, or the role they were playing in this climate change initiatives across the globe. And it was an overwhelming success, and we've replicated and fine-tuned it. We're really sort of now looking to be the premier player for the western states, not just California. And we know with the election of Congressman Henry Waxman from L.A. to be the chair of the powerful Energy and Commerce Committee in Commerce, that the California experience in driving this marketplace is now truly driving the federal marketplace on how we as a country and deal with climate change and how it affects our economy. So we brought in all those players. We find that the reactions are that it's sort of they say that what Sundance was for the movie industry, we're trying to get VerdeXchange to be for the clean and green technology area, and we think the western states and the Pacific Rim are fundamentally important players in that arena. So that's what we've done, and the reaction is good, and come on down January 24th and 25th to LA and do it again.
Well, now, but now you have 3 years under your belt, David, and I know you're always learning. That's what I love so much about you, and that's why you're such an inspirational leader. That's what I found over the last 20 years. So you're always learning. So what did you expect that didn't happen in these last 3 years, and what didn't you expect that did happen with regards to your evolution of the VerdeXchange and also the evolution of the Green is Good, the Green Revolution, and the sustainability movement as a whole? Well,
great question. I think what we found in our early look into the marketplace is that it was driven by verticals. There were very deep and powerful interest groups in solar and wind and geothermal, in all the old energy sectors that involve fossil fuels, and obviously the financial community, the venture community have their own associations, their own meetings, but nobody at the time 3 years ago was doing a cross-platform event that really exposed those decision makers, those leaders, both public and private, who were putting together complex initiatives, whether they be global, whether they be corporate like Google, or municipal like New York or Los Angeles or Boston, or abroad in both Germany and Japan. And so we tried to put together the cross-platform event of events. Since that time, I think our model has influenced a number of other organizations to try to follow us, but I still think we've perfected it in a way that's pretty important for those people in 2 days trying to get a sense of what's in market, about to be in market, and needed in market in a way they couldn't by going to a siloed vertical conference. The other thing I learned was that in California, even though we're on the cutting edge politically, that we had more interest in our market and these kinds of marketplace events from abroad, from both Canada and Japan and Australia and France and Great Britain and Germany, than we did in our own regional market of business leaders, even given the size of this 8th largest economy in the world being California and metropolitan Los Angeles being the 15th or 16th. We had more interest in being in this marketplace from abroad than locally, and we've tried over the last 2 years, rather successfully, I think, to really galvanize and grow in appreciation the regional and California and Western states market to the value of everybody being under one roof to display what's in market, about to be in market, and needed in market. So that's where we've learned and evolved the most.
Well, having gone to your conferences and spoken thanks to you at your conferences, which I'm so thankful for to have that kind of platform, David, what I learned attending these conferences is that you're truly living. The VerdeXchange is truly a living, evolving mechanism for Thomas Friedman's proposition that the world is flat and that the Earth race is really on now, and it's up to us to be part of it and potentially win it by aggregating all of these wonderful innovators. Explain Friedman's connection to the VerdeXchange in terms of his philosophy and what you're doing, because you've truly made it an international event. It's not California-centric, even though it happens in California. Explain who comes, internationally speaking, and what the value of that really means.
Well, I think it's an interesting example of what you're saying, and what we're doing was in our first conference. It was timed literally overlapping the Bali UN conference and the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo to former Vice President Gore, and we literally tied both into our event. We had Mary Nichols speaking to us and doing a radio interview on public radio from our conference while she was in Bali, and we had Davis Guggenheim, who was the producer of Al Gore's movie Inconvenient Truth, from Oslo, on the same line doing the same interview and part of it. And Davis came back to our conference this past January with Creative Artists Agency and explained the role of the media in affecting the culture and thus the policies that surround us.
David, let me just take a break here. We're going to let our sponsors pay for our show, and then we're going to come back, and I want to hear the end of that answer with regards to the international flavor of the VerdeXchange, and we're going to ask you a lot more questions, so stay tuned for more of Green is Good.
If a little green is good, more is even better. Now, back to Green is Good with John Shigarian and Mike Brady.
Welcome back to Green is Good. Mike and I are so honored today to have David Abel on the line with us. And David, we were talking about, and I cut you off, but we were talking about Thomas Friedman's Earth race and the confluence of international players that you bring to the VerdeXchange is truly unbelievable. It's the best that I've ever seen at any conference that I've gone to in terms of the green conferences. Share with us more about your vision of that and how it's actually working in reality.
Well, John, thank you. I'm glad to get back to that, because the international influence in the green and clean technology arena is amazing to learn about and to participate in. Obviously, for the last 2 or 3 decades, the Japanese, for example, and the Europeans have been without fossil fuels, really diving into these technologies and relying on them and making them part of their infrastructure and part of the habits of their citizens. We want that technology shared, both to drive up the quality that's in this market and to inspire other entrepreneurs to reach higher. So I'm going to just share one bit about the upcoming conference. On the first day on January 24th, we'll have sort of a progressive event here in L.A. 3 consul generals will ask us into their residencies, all in the same neighborhood of L.A., and we'll start with the Canadian residents and we'll end with the Japanese, and in each case, that country's prime technology will be featured, and all the panelists and guests of the conference who are dedicated to that conference will be asked to be a part of this progressive event. But let's talk about the people that have come. We had the chairman and CEO of the largest railroad in Japan with us last January to talk about high-speed rail, and we've had the French consul send their leading person on nuclear and what's happening is that part of a portfolio in France. We've had the German Green Party representatives come and talk about recycling, as well as what they're doing in solar and wind. We've had the Canadians come again on recycling, Plasco and their Consul General leading a panel on tech transfer from universities. So this is a global marketplace, and the technologies that are driving it, again, what's in market, about to be market, and needed to be market, no boundaries. And we've asked the best that we can identify, both on product and sustainable kinds of practices, and the financing, cap and trade, big in Europe, big in Great Britain, has been a part of our program, and California is pushing cap and trade, and now the federal entertainment of it could push $1 trillion new market on top of this clean and green marketplace that we're talking about. So we've involved them all, and the response has been terrific to that.
And some of also the California players you've had are just amazing. The Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, Sempra, Edison. So you've included also the host state players also. So you found a way to include all. The inclusiveness of it is truly remarkable. But how are you evolving that? Who else is now joining? You know, historically, what you've done is amazing. And I remember that discussion by the Japanese railroad company. It truly was awe-inspiring how fast they move folks from city to city with their trains over in Japan. Who are you now? Who's going to come to the next year's conference on January 24th and 25th? Who are some of the new players that you have invited and they've agreed to come?
Well, obviously, you know, the same players are coming back and more. In Japan, we expect Mitsui and a whole host of Panasonic and Toyota and Honda who've been part of our conference before. There'll be an electric car focus here because of the significance of both the federal initiatives and state initiatives to move this into production. We had Miles cars here, and I expect we're going to have a number of electric car makers part of our conference again. The French, I think, will be more represented than before, partially because of the high-speed rail and partially because of the other technologies they've advanced. And I think on one of the areas you're involved in, the recycling of electronic material, and you're a leader in that both in North America, both in Canada and the United States, we found that to be a very attractive issue for a host of agencies and procurers that are interested in the new techniques and how to recycle what they have. Water will be represented from Australia and hopefully Israel in this conference. Again, water is that commodity that's scarce and becoming people are becoming dependent on in ways they never had to before, and they could import before, and now they're thinking about how to recycle, and zero import being the policy of choice. And we've had countries dealing with that, as I said, Australia and Israel, that have lessons to teach all of us in the Western United States. Again, we had Senator Bingaman, the chair of the Energy Committee of the Senate, address our conference this past January. We've had Sandia Labs from New Mexico at our conference and will again. So the labs, especially with the selection of Secretary Chu to head the Energy Department, is one of those areas that we'd like to delve more deeply in and expect to at the conference. So you're right. There are breaking stories here, especially because the federal government is now under a new administration with new energy, trying to adapt the best of what the states have been doing, and we think the Western states have been the models, and we want to feature that influence of the Western states on federal policy in this next January conference.
Well, that leads me to another question, David. I know you think locally, but you also think internationally, and you are one of the great thinkers who knows how to sort of balance the interests and figure out how they can work together. I just came back from Washington, D.C., and I was meeting with legislative aides of senators and congressmen, and I was shocked and also so excited to see how wonderfully they greeted me and how excited the political will is in Washington for everything and anything green. But balance that against what we're faced with here in California, the budget challenges that we've just been through and are still facing, and the economy, which is still going through choppy waters. How does the federal political will that now exists and the local excitement about the green technologies and the green tech world, but our financial challenges, how do you balance those interests and keep this movement evolving and push it forward?
Well, I think there's two possible answers to that I could offer. One is, how to use the new stimulus money, which the administration is opening up to entrepreneurs in clean and green technology to generate jobs in local and regional economies where the rules and regulations sort of encourage this development. I think you're going to see a lot of that in the western states, and you're going to see this evolve. It may not be clunkers for new cars, but it's going to be a powerful force for entrepreneurs who are going to create jobs in this area. So I think the stimulus is a piece of this puzzle that we need to better appreciate and use wisely. The second and a larger, using the same focus, which is green jobs, is how to get beyond the greenwash here, which is talking about green jobs in the abstract, and really produce clusters in regions that have assets that attract particular industries to them. And I could take in Southern California, for example, the automobile industry. We've always been a center for 20 years in auto design. How do we use our ports and our large market and the auto design professionals here to really create an electric car cluster here that brings in batteries and parts makers and manufacturers that really expand the workforce opportunities for generating jobs, generating income, and paying the taxes necessary to run our public sector. So I think every region, every state is on the same course as the federal government now, is how do you stimulate a new generation of jobs around new industries or clusters of industries that put us on the track of the 21st century economy. And I think part of our conference addresses how to do that. And I'm also the vice chairman of the LA Economic Development Corporation and deeply interested in this civically as well as through the VerdeXchange. It's a really significant challenge, and green and clean technology is one of those opportunities that needs to be advanced.
And David, given that, how do you keep pushing the edge with the VerdeXchange? What is your measurement tool for success for the upcoming conference on January 24th and 25th? How are you going to keep pushing the edge? And then also tell our listeners who you want to attend this. We've talked about all the amazing companies and public agencies that are going to be represented there from around the world, and who some of the great speakers are going to be and who they were historically. But who should be attending this kind of conference that you put on?
Sure. Well, I would say a sign of success would be to have 500 to 1,000 people with the energy level and intelligence of you there. That would be number one. But in terms of who we've attracted and who we want to attract, we want the procurers, the utilities, the public and private sector entities that are looking for how to implement their green and clean tech initiatives across platforms. And we think we're providing them a wonderful opportunity in a concentrated place with global people, leadership, to sort of see what's in those markets. We want alternative transportation technologies will be represented. We want the equity, debt, pension, and stimulus investment folks who are interested in what's happening to cap and trade, what's happening to venture capital, what's happening to equity investment to be there. We're obviously at a pivot coming out of almost a depression here that closed those markets, but they're about to open up again. They are starting to open up again, and being with us in January is an opportune time for them to be with the largest pension funds and the decision makers that are affecting the rules and regulations that will govern the return on investment from these business plans. The supply chain people that are involved with sustainable building materials and products and services will be there. And then one of the areas you're, as I said before, very close to, e-waste and waste-to-energy technologies will be featured. And I know of no utility, public or private, or sanitation department that isn't intimately interested in and being driven to being on top of that issue. Foreign trade, foreign direct investment, we'll have consul generals from 13 or 14 and trade ministers from 13 or 14 consulates with us, as well as the ports of the largest ports in the United States being in Los Angeles, Long Beach, and L.A., present, and we'll have a feature on green building materials and green building supply chain opportunities present. I mentioned Mitsui, who has a whole division on this, but there'll be large developers of product, and there'll be other manufacturers, and there'll be people like you wouldn't appreciate until you're there, the Los Angeles Community College District, the largest in the country, who have a new $3.8 billion bond to push the green procurement for their buildings, their new buildings and facilities. There'll also be measuring and how to measure and regulate emissions, the whole field of measuring and certification and verification will be well represented both globally and nationally, and so people wanting to be on top of that will be important. And obviously the Copenhagen post-Kyoto protocols that are evolving, who 1 month before our conference will have concluded, being on top of that with the consul generals from around the globe and from Washington, D.C., senators and congressmen will be important. So we're trying to get the best and the brightest, and as you said, both locally and globally, and we think that energy that comes out of that, the awareness of what's in market, about to be market, need in market, results in people like John Shigarian being happy.
Hey, well, David, we're down to the last couple minutes, and a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs. A couple of things. If you were an aspiring entrepreneur coming out of college or right now in high school or college, what 1 or 2 or 3 areas, if you wanted to get involved with the Green Revolution and start a business or be involved, would you recommend our listeners to get involved with? And then we're going to sign off and we're going to invite you back. But go ahead, you take it from there.
Well, it's hard not to be interested in what's happening to wind and solar. There are probably now more jobs in the wind energy field than there are in coal in the United States. I think there are 89,000 jobs in wind energy. So finding a way into these new emerging markets, or if you really want to take a risk into the things you're into e-waste and recycling, into water and geothermal, which are the next cutting-edge issues, are terrific opportunities to find your way, whether through a nonprofit working on these issues, and we have Environmental Defense and NRDC and a lot of green and clean NGOs that are part of this thing, starting there as an intern or in a field job, and then learning about the industry and moving into the private sector where the jobs are created for the middle class and the aspiring entrepreneur is a wonderful way to do it, exactly like my 28-year-old son did. He left Stanford for Green Corps and PERG and then found his way to working for a startup solar company. I think that trail is the track of the future for these young people.
Well, David, you've been an amazing guest today, and Mike and I are so thankful, and I ask all of our listeners who are interested in learning more about the VerdeXchange and the wonderful conference that you're going to have next January 24th and 25th in Los Angeles to go to VerdeXchange.org/conference. David, you're an inspiration to all that you touch. You've been inspiring me for 20 years. You're a green rock star, and you're living proof